Good Sabbath, everyone.
Good Sabbath.
We continue this week with our review of Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, in regards as to the section on judging others. The title of the message is To Judge or Not to Judge? That is the question. Part 2. Well, last week we concluded that the phrase, judge not, lest you be judged, is nearly always used out of context, and thus is far from the meaning Jesus was making a point about to the so-called religious elite of the day. Jesus is dealing with two different extremes of the problem we have when humans pass judgment. The first extreme, which is what judge not lest you be judged about, is this harsh, critical spirit. The second extreme is permissiveness. So we continue today in the second half of dealing with the harsh, critical spirit by taking up where we left off in Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 3. Matthew chapter 7, verse 3. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck out of your eye, and look, there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. Seems pretty clear. Jesus is pointing out here there's another problem with this Pharisaic righteousness of the day. Not only was it hypercritical, but it was also hypocritical. There's your vocabulary words for the day. It's almost like we judge people with some deranged form of bifocals, if you will. You guys know what bifocals are? They have two different lenses. You can see close up with one and far away with the other. A lot of us old people have those. Or older people. But it's almost like we judge people with some deranged form of these bifocals. They're not for reading. This deranged form of bifocals is for judging others. And it affects how we look at people. You see, we use that top part to look at ourselves from far away. And it kind of has a rosy tint to it. Looks pretty cool. Yeah, I'm all right. And then we, if you notice, a lot of times we tend to look past our shortcomings because we think those things that are good are so great that they overpower any possible shortcomings, not that there actually are any. But then we use that bottom part. And I'd phrase it this way because to look through bifocals through the bottom part, you have to do what? Look down your nose to see the lower part of your bifocals. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we do. We use the bottom part of these deranged form of bifocals and judging to look down at others. And Jesus said that's called hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. It's calling out the sin of another when you are committing the self-same sin. Do you hear that, boys? Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. It's calling someone else a sinner when you yourself have sin you need to deal with. Now, the fellow by the name of Bertrand Russell capsulized this hypocrisy when he said, I am firm, you are obstinate, and you are pig-headed. I have reconsidered, but you have changed your mind, and he's gone back on his word. That's a pretty good example, isn't it? Jesus tells us about a parable in Luke chapter 18 about the Pharisee that had gone in the temple to pray. When he entered, he noticed what? A publican or a sinner, prostrate at the altar, crying out in abject surrender to God, confessing his sins and asking God for forgiveness. Now, instead of praising God that the man had seen the error of his ways, Instead, the Pharisee takes that deranged pair of bifocals we've been talking about. He looks down his nose through the bottom part of those bifocals and says to God, "Oh my, I'm glad I'm not like that scumbag over there." Then looking to God through the upper part of his glasses, he says to God, "You are just so blessed to have someone like me on your side." When I put it that way, it sounds pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? But folks, this is the exact kind of judging that Jesus was condemning in this passage. You see, folks, we're not qualified to judge other people because it's impossible for us to be impartial. We're wired where we use these funky bifocals, this deranged form, and we're influenced by our own imperfections. You see, in today's passage, Jesus uses the analogy comparing the plight of having a plank, and since some of us may not know what a plank is, all of us know what a 2x4 or 2x6 is. It's a big piece of wood. I mean, in fact, it's bigger than our eye. That's how ridiculous this is. But he says, you got this buddy of yours here who's got this little speck of dust. And you're over there trying to help him when you've got this big old hunk of wood in your eye. You can't even see to get to the speck. And as ridiculous as that is, in reality, it's a perfect analogy. And while most of us have heard or read this passage so many times, I'm sure the ridiculousness of it no longer jumps out at us as it should. But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that the people in Jesus' audience would have been ROFL, or rolling on the floor laughing, at the idiotic reasoning such an action would be. The reason that today the analogy doesn't work is there's not many, if any of us, that work with 2x4s that much, any kind of wood. Unless you happen to be in the carpentry trade, you might not ever even see one. But you have to understand that in those times, everybody used wood. It was the material of the day. So you can imagine they're just holding their gut, laughing and saying, yeah, that's ridiculous. Close your eyes with me a minute and let's put it in a more modern scene, although your younger people may not remember. Remember the Three Stooges movies? So close your eyes and imagine the Three Stooges. Here's Larry, you know, the guy that's bald on top with a fuzzy head on the side. And he's staggering around because he's got this little piece of sawdust in his eye. Oh, help me, get it out, help me, get it out. And he's jumping around hollering about how much it hurts. So Shemp, being the helpful guy that he is, decides to come over and help Larry get the speck out. And as he goes over there, what he doesn't realize the problem is Shemp was goofing around and somehow got a 2x6 stuck in the side of his head. So here's this big old board sticking out of his head, and as he walks over to Larry, he's thinking he's going to get the speck out of his eye, and he realizes he needs tweezers, and as he turns, he smacks Larry upside the head and knocks him out. That's the kind of ridiculousness of it that Jesus was trying to teach here. You see, you have to wonder, why would Jesus use this plank and speck? Well, possibly for the fact that Jesus was what by trade? A carpenter. He was a carpenter's son. What do you think his father taught him to do? Carpentry. So he talked about something familiar. And again, I believe that in that day, because of all the wood that was used then, it was very familiar to them, made total sense. But one pastor I know tells it like this. If Jesus were living today, he might have said that a man would be sitting in judgment on another person is like a man who is watching a football game. Have you ever listened to a man watch a football game, especially if his team's losing? He'll criticize the quarterback for not throwing well. He'll criticize the receivers for not catching what is the easiest pass in the world. It was right in the breadbasket. The lineman for not blocking well. No wonder we can't keep a quarterback. You won't keep protecting him. And here he is, sitting in his recliner, eating Cheetos or pizza and drinking soda pop with a big old belly. Oh, wait a minute. Be careful now. I need to get out of that position. That's starting to look like me. But he's criticizing this elite sport team. Now, this is not your local bunch of guys. This is the best of the best. These are professional athletes. These are men who are in their prime, who are in peak physical condition. Not couch potatoes. So you have to ask, if he's so good at knowing what to do and how to do it and when to do it and where to do it and why to do it, then why is he sitting in the cotton picking chair watching the game instead of out there on the field playing the game? Or at least coaching it? I'll tell you why. I've seen him try to get out in the backyard and play ball. Jesus is simply trying to say in this passage, you have no room to criticize other people because of your own ineptitude. Yet, despite the fact that we are unqualified, we still judge. We do. It's just our nature. It's what we do. And then sadly, many times the reason that we judge is for one simple reason. Because we think that somehow when we judge others and put them down, that it elevates us up. We think that somehow it makes us better than them. At least makes us feel better anyway. And you know what the sad thing is? That's the exact same thing the fellow was doing in the passage when he saw the publican at the altar. He was putting him down so that it would make himself feel better. Not much has changed in 2,000 years, has it? Human nature is still what it was. We have some clouded reasoning. We somehow believe if we have a problem with sin in our own lives, that somehow it takes a little pressure off of that to point the finger at others for a while. It makes our sin not seem quite so bad after all. If someone else, at least I'm not doing that. Yes, God, I know I've got to work on this, but at least I'm not doing that. But Jesus warns us here that we've got to clean up our own act before we tamper with the lives of others. Notice here something. He didn't say, don't get the speck out of your brother's eye, did he? He said, clean it up in your own eye first. Now, wait a minute. We'll go back to that in a minute. Let's just hold that thought. Basically, what he's saying in the Shays message is, take care of your own lawn at home before you complain about the neighbor's yard and what it looks like. Oh, and I don't think that the plank in our eyes is necessarily a sin that's worse than our brother's. In fact, sometimes that sin may be simply the sin of self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. It's that ridiculous sin of appointing ourselves as God's official speck inspectors. God's official speck inspectors. Like somehow the Almighty God needs our help. See, when you put it in plain terms, it's pretty ridiculous. And yet it's so ingrained in our nature, we do it every day. The sin of self-righteousness. I've always liked the analogy of our hand. Now, you younger folks may not remember, but I'm sure all of us in our mid-40s and beyond remember our parents saying, well, if one finger is pointing at others, there's still at least three pointing at you. Drives the point home, doesn't it? Brothers and sisters, when we spend our time pointing our finger at other people's sin, we distract ourselves from dealing with our own sins, and that's the real danger of judging. It's so important, I'm going to say that again. When we spend our time pointing our fingers at other people's sins, we are distracted from dealing with our own sins, and that is the real danger of judging. Missing the boat entirely. Here's a news flash for you. You ready? We're all sinners. We're all sinners. And we're to work together as a family to overcome those sins. Together as a family. Here's a novel thought to ponder. The only sins over which I have control are my own through the power of the Holy Spirit, and those are the ones that should command my greatest attention. The only sins over which I have control through the Holy Spirit are my own, and those are the ones that should command my greatest attention. And not only is that a problem of the time then, not only can we recognize it's a problem today, but it had been a problem. If you go back to Genesis chapter 38, and well, I'll paraphrase here. Here we've got Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar. Now, her husband had died without her having children. So according to the law of that day, Judah gave her his second son. But his second son wouldn't have anything to do with her, so she didn't have a child either. Then, for whatever reason, Judah's second son died. And for some reason, I don't know if Judah was wondering if she was killing him or what, but he decided, you know what, you're not getting my last son. I've only had 3. The other 2 have died being married to you. I'm not going to give you the third one. Well, Tamar got crafty. The next time Judah said he was going to the market, Tamar dressed herself up as a prostitute, disguised her face, and she seduced Judah and became pregnant in the process. Now later on, when word came to Judah that Tamar was pregnant out of wedlock, he said, "Oh my, this is terrible. Tamar must be put to death. Go get Tamar." So they brought Tamar to Judah to be judged. And Judah says, "Tamar, is it true that you're pregnant?" And she says, "Yes, I am." He says, "Well, then by the law you must die." And she said, "Well, that's fine, but I want you to know you're the father." Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You see, we crazy humans use these delusional glasses of judgment that we think allows us to see so perfectly the imperfect things in others' lives that need our assistance to discover and correct. Yet Jesus is telling the folks of that day here that they were being overly critical and hypocritical when they did it. Hypercritical and hypocritical when they did that. I'm so glad that Jesus was just dealing with the problem of that day, and we can gloss over this verse because it doesn't apply to us, right? Yeah, right. Right. I've seen too many heads nodding when I describe this problem. Now, don't forget, though, that Jesus didn't stop there. Let's go back to my point earlier. He did not instruct us to stay out of other people's business. Instead, He placed upon us the responsibility of helping our brother or sister with the qualifying directive to first remove the plank from your own eye so you will clearly see to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. He was saying, deal with the sin of self-righteousness so that when you deal with the speck in your brother's eye, you're doing it with a heart of love motivated by compassion, because as part of the family of God, you want them all to be able to grow together with you into the fullness of the body of Christ. He's not saying here, don't judge. He's saying when you judge, do it without the sin of self-righteousness. Do it without being guilty of the exact same sin you're trying to help them with. Do it, but do it the right way. Get the 2x4, 2x6. Some of us may be 6x6, but get it out of your eye and then you can help. You want to help brother or sister? I mean, how many of us truly are motivated with love? We want to help our brother or sister. Man, I could just help them overcome that. They'd be so much happier. And we're just so feel like we're motivated by love, not realizing that some of the very things that we're doing in our own life are what encourage them to do those things in their own. That's exactly what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying don't help your brother. He's not saying don't use judgment and discernment to understand when your brother or sister is caught in a particular error of their ways that needs assistance in pointing out and encouragement to hold them accountable. He's saying when you do that, make sure you're not guilty of the same thing or guilty of the sin of self-righteousness. But just so we're clear, what is the loving Christian thing to do when someone comes to you and asks for your help because he or she has a speck in his or her eye? Is it to turn and walk away and say, no, I can't do that. Judge not, lest I be judged? Pull that out of context and use it as an excuse to avoid responsibility? No. Or do you say, no, I couldn't do that. I've had specks in my eye before, so I'm not qualified to do that. And we've never used the not qualified excuse either, have we? Of course not, you can't say that. Your brother or your sister has something in their eye and you need to help them get it out. How about when a child comes to you with a splinter in his finger, he's crying, please, get this out, get it out, it hurts so bad. What's the Christian thing to do? Leave the splinter there? No. You take the splinter out. So Jesus was saying there's definitely a need here. There's a time and a place to practice discernment in other people's lives. If you see brothers or sisters who have specks in their eyes, you need to help them get it out. But first, you take out that 2x4 of self-righteousness out of your own eye. Paul put it this way in Galatians 6 and verse 1. He said, brothers, if a man is controlled by a particular sin, then those of you who are spiritual restore him to righteousness with a spirit of gentleness. Brothers, if a man is controlled by a particular sin, those of you who are spiritual, restore him to righteousness with a spirit of gentleness. You who are spiritual. Now, he's not talking about deacons and pastors. Let's just clear that up. That doesn't free you of responsibility. He's saying not self-righteous, but spiritual. Those of you who have the evidence of the fruit of the Spirit in your life, you go and you restore him. Just as we read last week about what Jesus said, in Matthew 18. If a brother's overtaken, if he offends you, what do? You go to him. In fact, he said, if your brother sins against you, you go to him and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. You've restored someone to the fold. There are too many instances in Scripture that tell us that in fact we are to judge, we are to hold one another responsible and accountable. What Jesus is dealing with here is how we go about doing it and when we do it. We're to judge the actions of our brother or our sister and determine if they've sinned against us. And when they do, we're to take loving action to restore that relationship. Not critical, harsh, condemning action, but loving action with the sole intent of restoring the relationship. Now with this, we have concluded our look at the first extreme of the human nature, which is a harsh, critical spirit. Next week, we will look at the second extreme, which is the other end of the spectrum, and that's the spirit of permissiveness. The spirit of permissiveness. So as we go throughout this coming week, let's be certain to take time to ensure that we've taken the wood out of our own eyes, and remember that we have a responsibility to help get the speck out of our brother and sister's eyes. Amen.